There's something unusual about Canada. Something hidden in its geography that shapes everything you're about to see. And without understanding this one thing, the country's most spectacular places won't feel nearly as extraordinary as they actually are. So, before we dive into the mountains, the fjords, the deserts, and the forests, we'll begin with a handful of fascinating facts that reveal the secret behind Canada's dramatic landscapes. Then we'll explore the most amazing places across the country. And by the time we reach the final place, you'll see how every part of this country connects in ways that are easy to miss, but impossible to forget. Canada is a country shaped by extremes, and to understand it, we need to start with the single force that created almost everything you'll see in this video. It's something most travelers overlook, yet it defines the mountains, the coastlines, the plains, even the forests. That force is ice. Not just winter ice, but ancient ice. Ice that once covered almost all of Canada under a sheet more than 3 kilometers thick, nearly 2 miles. And when that ice finally began to retreat, it carved out valleys, sculpted lakes, flattened prairies, and left behind a landscape far wilder than most people imagine. But here's where things get interesting. The melting of that ice didn't just shape the land, it also shaped the people who came after it. Much of Canada's population lives along a single horizontal band near the US border. Why? Because after the glaciers receded, they left behind rocky shield, dense forests, and millions of lakes, beautiful but incredibly difficult to farm or build on. And this is just the first of many hidden patterns. Canada today has more lakes than the rest of the world combined. Over 2 million by most estimates. Some so tiny they're unnamed, others so vast they stretch farther than the eye can see. If you flew a straight line across central Canada, you'd see thousands of them flashing below you like scattered shards of blue glass. And many were created the same way, by the weight of the ice pressing into the land, then melting away. But water isn't the only thing Canada has in overwhelming quantities. Forest covers nearly half the country. That's about 3.5 million square kilometers, or almost 1.4 million square miles, making it one of the largest forested nations on Earth. And inside those forests lives something unexpected. Trees that are older than the pyramids. Some red cedars on the Pacific coast are more than 1,500 years old, surviving storms, fires, and entire civilizations rising and falling. If these trees could speak, Canada's entire history would fit into just the last chapter. Yet for all its ancient forests, this is also a country of geological youth. The Rocky Mountains, for example, rise high because they're still being pushed upward inch by inch. And the coast of the Atlantic shifts ever so slightly each year due to the constant pull of the world's strongest tides. But one part of the country holds a mystery even scientists are still trying to fully understand. Right near the center of Canada, the land is lifting, literally rising out of the earth. Not fast enough for you to see, but measurable. In some areas, it's climbing by more than 1 centimeter per year, almost half an inch. The cause? When the glaciers disappeared, they removed billions of tons of pressure. And now, thousands of years later, the land is still slowly bouncing back. And that's not the only phenomenon left behind by the ice. Even Canada's weather patterns are shaped by it. Winters can drop below minus 40 degrees Celsius, almost minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature where Celsius and Fahrenheit meet. Summers, meanwhile, can hit 35 degrees Celsius, about 95 degrees Fahrenheit. That contrast, so cold it freezes eyelashes, so warm it feels like the Mediterranean, creates some of the most dramatic seasonal transformations anywhere on Earth. But the extremes go far beyond temperature. In Canada's far north, the sun doesn't rise for weeks in winter, yet stays glowing above the horizon for 24 hours straight in summer. The line between day and night disappears. Life adjusts in ways that feel almost otherworldly. Even the animals adapt. Some wolves track migrating caribou for hundreds of kilometers across frozen tundra. Arctic foxes follow in their footsteps, scavenging what they can. And in the ocean, narwhals navigate waters so cold that even sea ice cracks under pressure. Still, one of the most surprising truths about Canada isn't about wildlife, forests, or ice. It's about people. More than 20% of Canadians were born outside the country. That makes it one of the most diverse nations in the world. You'll hear over 200 languages spoken on the streets of its major cities. You'll taste foods from every corner of the earth. And yet, despite this diversity, Canadian culture has a quiet, almost understated rhythm that sets it apart. People here hold doors for strangers. They apologize even when nothing happened. And they navigate some of the harshest winters with a sense of humor that could thaw snowdrifts. But beneath this calm exterior lies something surprising. Canada has one of the longest coastlines on the planet, 243,000 kilometers. That's about 151,000 miles. If you walked it non-stop, it would take you more than 30 years. And along that coastline lie ecosystems so different from one another that they could be separate worlds. Rainforest drenched in fog, rocky cliffs battered by Atlantic waves, Arctic shorelines where polar bears roam. This is why Canada feels impossible to describe with one word. It's not just big, it's layered, and each layer reveals something that helps explain the next one. Which brings us to the best part. Now that you know the hidden forces that shape this country, the ice, the forests, the cultures, the extremes, you'll see its landscapes differently. Because next, we're traveling through the most breathtaking places across Canada, one by one, beginning in a region that looks almost too perfect to be real. Banff National Park is where Canada's Rocky Mountains reveal their full scale, towering peaks, turquoise lakes, and glaciers shaped by millions of years of ice. What makes this place truly remarkable isn't just how it looks, but why it looks this way. The lakes here get their surreal blue color from rock flour, tiny particles created when ancient glaciers grind stone into powder. When sunlight hits this powder suspended in the water, the color intensifies into that electric shade you've seen in photographs. It's real, and it changes with the seasons as the glaciers melt and refreeze. The valley systems around Banff also tell a deeper story. Many trails follow paths carved not by people, but by ice more than 10,000 years ago. Some ridges still show the marks of glacial retreat, scratches in solid rock left by ice thousands of feet thick. And Banff's wildlife carries its own clues. Elk, mountain goats, and bears use the same corridors shaped by glaciation, revealing how landforms influence animal behavior even today. But here's the detail most visitors never learn. Banff sits on the edge of one of Earth's most complex mountain building zones. The mountains are actually stacked in layers, pushed upward over unimaginable distances. This dramatic uplift continues northward, and as we follow it, the landscape evolves into something even more compelling. The Icefields Parkway is often described as one of the most beautiful drives on the planet, but that phrase barely scratches the surface. This route runs through a corridor where mountain peaks, glaciers, and deep valleys collide in a way you won't find anywhere else in North America. What makes it extraordinary is the density of geological features. In just 230 kilometers, nearly 140 miles, you pass more than 100 ancient glaciers, each one a remnant of a much older ice age. The Columbia Icefield, which feeds them, holds enough frozen water to fill millions of swimming pools. But here's the part most travelers never realize. The Parkway sits on the Continental Divide, a line where water flows in opposite directions, some to the Arctic Ocean, others to the Atlantic. You'll also see evidence of constant motion. Some glaciers retreat several meters, several feet, every year, reshaping the valleys below them. Scientists use these changes to predict long-term shifts in climate and landscape. And as this route climbs higher, the environment begins to shift. Forests thin, peaks sharpen, and the wilderness ahead becomes even more dramatic. Jasper National Park is where the Rockies open up into vast, rugged wilderness, bigger, quieter, and wilder than many expect. It covers nearly 11,000 square kilometers, about 4,200 square miles, making it the largest national park in the Canadian Rockies. But the real surprise lies beneath the surface. Jasper sits on a complex system of underground rivers and limestone passages that feed its famous lakes. Some water here takes decades to filter through rock before finally emerging in turquoise pools. Jasper is also one of the world's largest dark sky preserves. With almost no light pollution, stargazers can see the Milky Way with the naked eye. This darkness also helps wildlife navigate. Elk migrate through open valleys in patterns shaped partly by moonlight, while wolves rely on sound rather than sight to hunt across long distances. What truly sets Jasper apart is how its landscapes were sculpted. Huge sections of the park were shaped by catastrophic glacial floods thousands of years ago, carving deep canyons and wide basins. These floods moved boulders the size of cars, sometimes entire houses, using sheer force. As you travel southward, the rugged energy of this landscape softens. The mountains widen, the prairies begin to appear, and the next region reveals a surprising combination of two very different worlds. Waterton Lakes National Park is a place where opposites collide. It's where the Rocky Mountains crash abruptly into the vast plains, creating landscapes that look almost stitched together. This sharp boundary exists because the mountains here rose so quickly, geologically speaking, that the prairies barely had time to react. In some areas, ancient rock layers more than 1.5 billion years old sit directly on top of much younger formations, a rare feature known as a thrust fault. Waterton is also home to one of the deepest lakes in Canada, plunging more than 140 meters, nearly 460 feet, formed by a glacier that carved a long, narrow trench. The wind funnels through this trench with unusual strength, producing gusts that can exceed 120 kilometers per hour, about 75 miles per hour, strong enough to shake the trees along the shoreline. But what's most fascinating is how the landscape begins to change again as you continue the journey. The rugged peaks gradually give way to a new environment shaped by sun, vineyards, and warm valley winds. The Okanagan Valley feels like a different country compared to the Rockies. This region is one of the warmest areas in Canada, with summer temperatures often reaching 35 degrees Celsius, around 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The climate is shaped by a rain shadow effect. Moisture from the Pacific Ocean gets trapped by the coast mountains, leaving the valley dry, sunny, and ideal for vineyards. That's why the Okanagan produces over 80% of British Columbia's wine, including varieties that rarely grow so far north. But the valley's landscape holds a deeper history. Many of the lakes here were formed by the last ice age, carved into long, deep basins that stretch for tens of kilometers. Some are over 200 meters, or 650 feet deep. The long shape of these lakes acts like a natural wind tunnel, creating breezes that help stabilize temperature for the vineyards above. The region is also home to unique ecosystems. Pockets of desert-like terrain support species you won't find elsewhere in Canada, including prickly pear cactus and rattlesnakes adapted to dry hillsides. A mix this unusual doesn't happen by accident. It's the result of thousands of years of shifting climate and terrain. As you travel westward, the dry heat fades and the climate changes again, creating an entirely new coastal world shaped by ocean, mountains, and rain. Vancouver sits in a location so strategic that every part of its geography contributes to its character. The city is surrounded by water on three sides and backed by steep mountains rising more than 1,200 meters, roughly 4,000 feet, almost immediately behind the skyline. This configuration creates a microclimate, cooler summers, mild winters, and an astonishing amount of rainfall. Some neighborhoods receive over 2,000 millimeters of rain each year, nearly 80 inches, supporting lush, temperate rainforest. Vancouver's shoreline reveals traces of glaciation too. During the last ice age, massive glaciers advanced into what is now the city, carving deep inlets that later filled with seawater. That's why the coastline has so many narrow bays and fjord-like passages. Even Stanley Park sits on land sculpted by glacial movement, with exposed bedrock showing grooves carved by ice thousands of years ago. The city's cultural landscape is just as layered. More than 50% of residents are first-generation immigrants, creating one of the most diverse metropolitan areas in North America. This diversity shapes food, festivals, and the rhythm of daily life. But as you move beyond the city's edge, the urban density gives way to alpine wilderness, where the change in elevation creates a dramatic shift in climate and terrain that you can feel within minutes. Whistler is known worldwide for skiing, but its deeper story lies in how the landscape formed. The mountains around Whistler are part of a volcanic belt, and while the volcanoes here are dormant, their past activity shaped everything from the peaks to the mineral-rich soils. Some ridges are remnants of ancient lava flows, while valleys below were carved by glaciers moving at the pace of centimeters of inches per year. Whistler's modern identity comes from its snowpack. The area receives more than 11 meters of snowfall annually, around 36 feet, thanks to moist Pacific air rising over the coast mountains and cooling rapidly. This heavy snow creates ideal conditions not only for skiing, but also for glacial preservation in surrounding peaks. What surprises many visitors is how wildlife adapts to the elevation changes. Black bears often use ski runs as travel corridors in summer because the slopes offer open visibility. Meanwhile, mountain goats cling to cliffs shaped by a mix of glacial erosion and volcanic uplift. The village itself was built for a global event, the 2010 Winter Olympics, but it has roots that go far deeper, connected to Indigenous roots used for trade and seasonal movement. As the journey continues northward, the coastal rainforest thickens, the fjords deepen, and the landscape takes on a more ancient, untouched character, unlike anything seen so far. The Great Bear Rainforest is one of the last intact temperate rainforests on Earth, stretching for more than 400 kilometers, nearly 250 miles along the remote Pacific coast. Its climate is shaped by warm ocean currents and constant moisture, creating a landscape where massive cedars and Sitka spruces can grow for more than 1,000 years. Some of these giants reach heights of 70 meters, around 230 feet. But the most surprising part of this rainforest is an animal many people don't even know exists. The Kermode bear, often called the spirit bear. It's not a polar bear, and it's not an albino. It's a rare white phase of the black bear caused by a recessive gene found mostly in this region. Indigenous stories say the bear's color represents the memory of the last ice age. The coastline adds another dimension. Fjords cut deep into the mountains, formed when glaciers retreated and seawater flooded the valleys. These narrow waterways are so rich in nutrients that humpback whales return yearly to feed and teach their calves. As you travel farther north, the coastline becomes wilder. The forests give way to rugged mountains, and the climate shifts again toward a world dominated not by rain, but by ice. Kluane National Park holds one of the largest non-polar ice fields on the planet. Here, ice covers 21,000 square kilometers, more than 8,000 square miles, forming a frozen world of crevasses, ridges, and massive glaciers. The park is also home to Mount Logan, Canada's highest peak at 5,959 meters, nearly 19,551 feet. Its size is so immense that the mountain creates its own weather, with storms forming suddenly and temperatures dropping faster than almost anywhere else in the country. The region's geology is equally dramatic. Kluane sits on the edge of the Pacific and North American tectonic plates, which means the landscape is constantly shifting. Small earthquakes occur frequently, and the mountains continue to rise at a measurable rate, proof that the Earth here is still in motion. Wildlife has adapted to this extreme environment. Dall sheep navigate steep slopes that would be impossible for most animals. Grizzly bears dig for roots in valley bottoms shaped by glacial meltwater, and in summer, salmon travel hundreds of kilometers to reach spawning grounds in rivers fed by ice. Yet despite all this raw power, a surprising contrast waits just beyond these mountains. As the ice recedes, an entirely different landscape appears, one that feels almost out of place in the far north. Carcross Desert is often called the smallest desert in the world, covering only about 2.6 square kilometers, or 1 square mile. But its origin isn't what most people expect. This isn't a true desert created by heat and lack of rain. Instead, it formed from ancient glacial lakes that dried up thousands of years ago, leaving behind fine sand that winds still shape today. That's why the dunes constantly shift, sometimes moving several meters each year. The sand itself is surprisingly old. Some grains date back to the last ice age, carried here by meltwater streams and exposed when the massive lakes receded. And as you leave this unexpected landscape behind, the journey takes a dramatic turn. From small, shifting sands to one of the most powerful natural spectacles in all of North America. Niagara Falls is one of the most recognizable natural wonders in the world. But what makes it truly fascinating is the speed at which it changes. The falls formed about 12,000 years ago, carved by water rushing from a retreating glacier. Since then, erosion has pushed the falls upstream by almost 11 kilometers, around 7 miles. Even today, the American and Horseshoe Falls continue to wear away the rock beneath them, though much more slowly, thanks to modern water management. The flow rate is astonishing. At peak volume, more than 168,000 cubic meters of water per minute drop over the edge. That's over 6 million cubic feet. This force generates massive amounts of hydroelectric power, supplying energy to both Canada and the United States. Engineers carefully control valves and tunnels to balance electricity production with the iconic appearance of the falls. But the geology here tells an even deeper story. The layers behind the curtain of water reveal ancient tropical seas that covered this region hundreds of millions of years ago. Fossils of coral and marine life are still found in the rock. As you move away from the roar of the falls, the landscape shifts dramatically, leading into a region shaped more by human diversity than by geological power. Toronto is Canada's largest city, a place where geography, history, and migration patterns converge. It sits on the northern shore of Lake Ontario, one of the Great Lakes formed by glaciers that carved deep basins as they advanced and retreated. The lake moderates Toronto's climate, preventing the extreme temperature swings common in other parts of the country. But what sets Toronto apart isn't its location, it's its cultural makeup. More than 50% of residents were born outside Canada, making it one of the most diverse cities in the world. Over 200 languages are spoken across its neighborhoods, and no single ethnic group holds a majority. This diversity is reflected in food markets, street festivals, and entire districts shaped by communities from every continent. Toronto's skyline also carries traces of its geological past. The city is built on layers of sediment left behind by ancient lakes and rivers. Some downtown structures stand on bedrock more than 400 million years old, while others rest on compacted clay deposited by glacial meltwater. Yet for all its urban density, Toronto is surprisingly close to wilderness. Just a few hours north lies a completely different world, one defined by forests, canoe routes, and seasonal transformations that draw visitors year-round. Algonquin Provincial Park is one of the best places to understand the natural heart of central Canada. Covering nearly 7,600 square kilometers, about 2,900 square miles, it's a landscape shaped by ancient glaciers that left behind rolling hills, thousands of lakes, and dense forests. Many of these lakes fill long, narrow troughs carved by ice, moving at a pace of centimeters per day. The park is famous for its wildlife. Moose thrive in wetlands rich with aquatic plants. Beavers build elaborate dams that reshape waterways, creating new habitats over time. Wolves roam across large territories, and biologists have been studying their behavior here for decades. One of the most interesting findings is how their communication patterns depend on landscape features, valleys, and lakes act like natural amplifiers for their calls. Algonquin is also known for its seasonal transitions. In autumn, the combination of maple, birch, and oak trees produces some of the most vibrant fall colors in North America. These colors happen because shorter days trigger chemical changes in the leaves, revealing pigments usually hidden during summer. As you continue traveling east, the wilderness gradually blends with historic architecture and cultural landmarks, leading into a region where Canada's past and present intersect in unexpected ways. Ottawa is Canada's capital. But what makes it fascinating isn't just politics, it's how the city ended up here in the first place. Most capitals are chosen for symbolic or historical reasons. Ottawa wasn't. It was selected in 1857 because it sat far enough from the US border to be safe from invasion, yet close enough to serve as a central point between English and French populations. Geography, not ideology, shaped its destiny. The city stands on the confluence of three rivers, including the Ottawa River, an ancient waterway once carved by glacial melt that drained massive inland lakes thousands of years ago. The landscape still shows traces of those floods in its terraces and steep banks. One of Ottawa's defining features is the Rideau Canal, a 202-kilometer, about 125-mile engineering project built almost entirely by hand in the early 1800s. In winter, when the temperature drops well below -15 degrees Celsius, around 5 degrees Fahrenheit, the canal becomes the world's largest natural skating rink. Ice thickness is measured daily, and crews maintain it much like a highway system. Ottawa's architecture blends Gothic Revival structures with modern glass and steel, but as you continue deeper into the historical corridor of Eastern Canada, the blend of cultures becomes even more distinct and far older. Montreal sits on an island in the St. Lawrence River, a location that shaped every aspect of its development. The island was originally formed by volcanic activity more than 125 million years ago, leaving behind a small mountain, Mount Royal, that still rises in the center of the city. This hill created natural lookouts used by Indigenous peoples long before European arrival. Montreal grew because of the river. The St. Lawrence is one of the most important waterways in North America, acting like a highway that connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Great Lakes. Early traders, explorers, and settlers used this route for centuries, making Montreal a hub for commerce and culture. The city is now known for its remarkable linguistic mix. French is the dominant language, but the metro area includes communities from Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. This diversity fuels a food scene considered one of the best in the world, with influences spanning every continent. What surprises many visitors is Montreal's underground city, a network of tunnels stretching more than 33 kilometers, or about 20 miles, linking shops, stations, and buildings. It was built to help residents navigate harsh winters without stepping outside. But just upriver lies a city even older, with stone fortifications that tell a very different story about Canada's past. Quebec City is one of the oldest European settlements in North America. Founded in 1608 on a narrow cliff overlooking the St. Lawrence River. Its location was chosen for defense. The high ground offered a strategic advantage, and the river narrowed just enough to control trade and military movement. That geography is still visible today. The fortified Old Town, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, contains walls and gates built to withstand sieges. The architecture reflects centuries of history. Steep roofs designed to handle heavy snow, stone buildings constructed from local limestone, and narrow streets laid out long before cars existed. But the deeper story lies beneath the surface. Quebec City sits atop one of the oldest rock formations in the region, part of the Canadian Shield, which stretches for millions of square kilometers across the country. The climate here also shapes daily life. Winter temperatures can fall below -25 degrees Celsius, around -13 degrees Fahrenheit, allowing massive ice formations to drift down the St. Lawrence. These ice movements historically influenced shipping routes and even military planning. As you leave the city's fortified walls behind, the landscape changes once again. The architecture fades, the coastline widens, and the power of nature becomes the driving force of the journey ahead. The Bay of Fundy is home to the highest tides on Earth, and the numbers alone are hard to believe. In some areas, the vertical difference between low and high tide reaches 16 meters, nearly 52 feet. Scientists still study why the tides are so extreme, but the leading explanation is resonance. The shape and depth of the bay create a natural rhythm that amplifies the movement of the ocean, similar to water sloshing in a bathtub at just the right frequency. This tidal power shapes the coastline constantly. Sea cliffs erode, new sea caves form, and entire rock formations appear and disappear throughout the year. Mudflats, exposed at low tide, become feeding grounds for tens of thousands of migrating shorebirds, especially semi-palmated sandpipers that travel from the Arctic to South America. As you travel farther along the Atlantic coastline, the raw geological power gives way to a smaller but equally iconic landscape, one shaped by wind, waves, and solitary granite. Peggy's Cove is built on a landscape that looks almost frozen in time. The area sits on a massive expanse of exposed granite left behind by the last ice age. As glaciers receded more than 10,000 years ago, they scraped the surface clean, leaving behind rounded boulders and smooth rock slabs called glacially polished surfaces. These formations are so resistant that storms and tides barely change them, even after centuries of pounding waves. At the heart of the cove stands one of the most recognizable lighthouses in North America. It was built in 1915, replacing an earlier wooden structure, and still guides ships through a coastline known for sudden fog and powerful swells. The fishing village surrounding it reveals another layer of the region's history. Wooden houses and boathouses sit on stilts, anchored directly into the rock, reflecting a time when fishing was the only industry here, and every structure needed to survive harsh winters and constant salt spray. In the end, Canada's identity is shaped by the same forces that carved its mountains, filled its lakes, and sculpted its coastlines. A country defined by scale and contrast, where every region tells a different chapter of the same geological and cultural story. From the Pacific to the Atlantic, these landscapes continue to evolve, slowly, quietly, and often in ways that are easy to overlook. Yet together, they form one of the most diverse natural tapestries on Earth. And while this journey reaches its final point, the patterns revealed here continue far beyond Canada's borders, shaping other regions with the same power and complexity.